Hey everybody, Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of our questions and answers show. Today is Saturday, December the 8th. We've got a whole bunch of things that you guys have asked over the last week since our last episode, so we're going to try and get to as many of them today as we possibly can. Remember the format. In the comments and feedback section of this particular show, put down your questions that you would like me to answer on next week's show, okay? If you don't hear your question being answered, chances are there's a couple of reasons for it. For one, some of you are asking the same questions that have already been asked and answered before in previous episodes. So if you don't hear yours, that means it was probably already tackled once before by another viewer who asked the question and I answered it. Also, some of the questions you guys are asking are really complex and are going to take up more time to answer than we have available on a show like this. Like there was one in particular that asked me to come up with a list of 10 bands whose career started off on a certain style of genre and then they went into more popular directions or something similar to that. And that's a very cool question, but I think it's going to take up a lot more time than what I have to really tackle with on a show like this. So I may do that on a separate show all on its own or something similar. So anyway, let's get started. So first question from our buddy Anthony Ferraro. Would a new car not having a CD player prevent you from buying it? For me, hell yes, people still buy CDs. I mean, I do. And when I bought my 2015 Toyota 4Runner, it absolutely had to have a CD player. Thankfully it did. I didn't have to finagle anything there. But, nowadays I think even if you purchased a car or vehicle without a CD player, you still want to listen to CDs, they all have like media hookups, so you could get like an external CD drive, or if you have an iPod or your phone, you can plug that stuff in there. So there's plenty of ways to still listen to your favorite music. But yes, I have a CD player in my car. I've got probably 50, 60, 70 CDs in the car itself at all times. You know, I have a big CD case and I have them in the bucket thing, and CDs are all over the place, and the side storage, the CDs everywhere in my car. So yes, absolutely. Scott McGregor, what's up, Scott? One question: have you ever heard of the African band Osibisa? Absolutely. They were a strange band with some jazzy, proggy, and of course African rhythms. Roger Dean even designed some fantastic album covers. Yeah, I like Osibisa quite a bit. They're definitely a unique band, and they're not a band I can listen to all the time, but I love playing them in the summertime, because there's a lot of really cool, like kind of African grooves, and some of their music is kind of in a weird way Santana-ish. And kind of jazzy, but they have, like, again, all those ethnic African influences and elements to their music, which I think is really cool. Yeah, their first two albums, the self-titled and the Woyaya, I believe it's called. Those two album covers were drawn by Roger Dean, and they're great, especially that second one. Awesome album cover art. But even some of their other albums that came out after it, like the Heads album and the Osibi Rock, I think is how it's pronounced. That had some really great artwork as well, not done by Roger Dean, but kind of in that style. But a lot of really good albums. I think I have the first like five or six Osibisa albums. They're very cool, worth checking out. Next question from Bruce Craig. What do you think of Fish from Aurelian's solo career? I mean, I dig it, especially the early stuff. So Vigil in the Wilderness of Mirrors is a great album. That's the first one he did after leaving Marillion. That's wonderful stuff. Very Marillion-ish, like those first four Marillion albums. Internal Exile is a great album. That's another one of my favorites. Sunsets on Empire is very strong. Rain Gods with Zippos, besides having one of the weirdest album titles of all, is actually a pretty solid album. I like the Suits album quite a bit. And Fellini Days is very good as well. I've heard most of his more recent stuff. I don't know if I've heard the last one or two. But I've heard some of his, like a few of his albums in the last like decade or so. And those are pretty good too. But I like those like first like 5 or 6 the best, in my opinion. But I love Fish. He's great. I've seen him live in concert doing his solo thing a couple times. I've met him, had a drink with him. He's a very cool guy. Next question from Netshopsos Moon. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Why is Hawkwind still never mentioned? Lots of LPs, prog rock, and never mentioned. What gives? I think I've mentioned Hawkwind a few times. I mean, I've got so many shows, it's kind of hard to say that I've never mentioned them, right? I think what you're asking is me to do a Hawkwind show, which I still might do, because I like Hawkwind. I have all the stuff they've ever recorded here, and I might just do that. So just keep watching. I'm considering it. Or maybe a top 10 songs. Now, that'd be difficult, right? We'll see. Next question from Luis Carrito. Have you ever met in person any famous musicians? And if so, tell us an anecdote. Yeah, I've met quite a few. Actually, I'll tell you two stories. I'll tell you a Fish story because we just answered a question about Fish. So I went to see, and I'm trying to remember what tour this was. Was it maybe the Suits tour or the Sunsets on Empire? It might have been the Sunsets on Empire tour. He did a little tour here in the U.S., a little club tour, obviously, and he played at was going to play at a little place in Poughkeepsie, New York, called the Chance Theater. And myself, my wife, who then was my girlfriend, we had just started dating, actually. I think it might have been the first concert I took her to. And Fish was playing there with Mastermind. I don't know if you guys remember Mastermind, another great prog band from the 90s. And before the concert, we decided to go to this little hole-in-the-wall bar that's a couple blocks away from the theater that Fish was playing at to go have a few beers. And they had like a little buffet or something like that, whatever. So grab some food or whatever. And we're waiting online to get food. We had our beers. And I'm standing behind this big, tall guy wearing like a rain jacket, whatever, and a hat. And I'm like, man, this guy's fucking taking forever here to get his food, right? And he's putting everything on the plate, stopping everything, whatever. And then I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh my God, this guy's just taking forever. I'd like to get some food here. And he turns around and he gives me a smile. Of course, you know who it was. And he's like, in his accent, of course, he goes, looks good, eh? Meaning the food. And I was like, holy shit. I'm getting all upset because Fish is taking his time getting food. And, we shared a couple of pleasantries. I told him I'm a big fan. We're going to see it. He goes, oh, I look forward to it being a good show, blah, blah, blah. I actually saw him again on the next tour in New York City. Similar situation. He was at a bar right down the street from the venue he was playing at, having a beer, and everybody was walking up and talking to him. But anyway, my other story is a Steve Hackett story. So Steve Hackett played at Nearfest, which is the Northeast Art Rock Festival in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, back, or actually was it, I'm trying to remember if it was actually, because that festival usually was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but for 2 years it was in Trenton, New Jersey. I don't remember, might have been in Trenton, New Jersey that year that Steve headlined. I don't remember. Anyway, it was one of the first or second morning, it was like that Sunday morning. And my buddies and I go down to breakfast in the hotel. And of course, who's sitting at a table by himself having breakfast but Steve Hackett? So I walk up. I was like, I got to go say hello to Steve Hackett, right? And I go walk up to Steve Hackett and I introduce myself and I tell him who I am. And I tell him, I have this progressive rock and metal website called Sea of Tranquility and would love to, maybe speak to you at some point and do an interview, whatever, but I don't want to disturb your breakfast. And I left him a card and he was very nice, very polite and very cheery and stuff like that. And he said, I would definitely love to speak to you, would enjoy checking out your site, and I hope you have a great breakfast and enjoy the show, and so on and so forth. So fast forward, it's got to be 2 years later or something like that. And I have the opportunity to actually interview him, but we did it on the phone. And again, I had no contact with him between the meeting him at Nearfest and doing this phone interview. And call into him, he answered the phone, and I believe he was in the UK at the time when I called him. And I said, hi, Steve, it's Peter Pardo from Sea of Tranquility. He goes, hi, Peter, how are you? In his wonderful British accent. And the first thing he says to me, he goes, I just wanted to ask you, did you enjoy your breakfast? And I was like, holy crap, he remembered me. I'm thinking and I was flabbergasted. I was like, Steve, it was so nice that you remembered, and so on. And asked about how I enjoyed the show and the festival and blah, blah, blah. And we did the interview. So that's two of my kind of cool stories, meeting some kind of famous prog people. There's a lot more I could tell. Met some really interesting metal people. Devin Townsend was a hysterical interview, and hanging out with him at a metal festival a bunch of years ago. And I met Jason Newsted, formerly of Metallica and Voivod, and all sorts of people. A lot of metal people. So anyway, good question. Matthew Walker. Hey, Pete, thanks so much for answering my question on Skynyrd last week. My question this week is, who do you prefer out of the AOR bands? Journey, Foreigner, Boston, or Styx? And what albums by those bands are your favorites? Also, who do you think of those bands was the most popular commercially and could fill arenas and stadiums, etc.? That's a good question. I would say, and I love all of them, but I would say probably my favorite is Styx. I mean, not by a lot, but I think I love all four of them. Absolutely love all four of them. And my favorite Styx albums are Grand Illusion, Pieces of Eight, Equinox, Crystal Ball, and I really like The Mission a lot. That's their most recent one. Really like that a lot. But, you know, I also love Cornerstone. I also love the early albums. You know, I love, I even like Paradise Theater. You know, so I love all the Styx albums for the most part. You know, Kilroy, obviously, hit or miss, and that was an early 90s album where they got back with Dennis again. That was kind of weak. But, you know, I love Styx. And as far as your second part of your question, who do you think was the most popular commercially? You know what? I'm going to have to say Journey, because I think Journey still sells out large arenas, played stadiums back in the day for many, many, many years. I think like probably if you look at all the album sales and all the tours and everything like that, I would have to say, and, you know, probably Boston in their heyday probably comes close, but, you know, Boston was like long bouts of inactivity. I think Journey has got to be the winner on that one, just from pure, consistent over the years album sales and hit singles and mega tours, and still to this day. So I think the winner on that one is probably Journey. From High Q165, thoughts about the Japanese band Bow Wow. Their albums Asian, Volcano, Warning from Stardust, and especially Signal Fire are some of the best hard rock metal ever. Do you agree? Honestly, I've never listened to Bow Wow. Heard about them for years. I've had many people tell me I should check them out. I'm going to have to check them out. Okay, but no, I have not listened to Bow Wow. Knicks Texans fans #1. Hey Pete, fairly new subscriber and watch all your videos. Absolutely love the channel. Who are 5 artist groups in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame who you don't think deserve to be there? You know, I think I'm going to go on record as being this might be the last question I'm going to take on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for a while, because, man, it just divides people big time. But, you know my opinion on the rap artists. NWA, come on, I don't agree. And there's some very, very like one-hit wondery, like 50s early rock and roll bands and pop bands that got in. And then I'm not knocking them at all, but, you know, a group that had just like one big hit and then nothing else, or very little else. There's so many other bands that deserve to get in there beforehand. You know, the Moonglows, Darlene Love. You know, again, their one claim to fame is great, each one of them, but it's like, what else was there? Are they going to put them in there just for that? So again, I'm not knocking them, but it's like, you know, Green Day, I got no use for Green Day, but they're in. I know they were really popular and whatever. Laura Nyro, you know, so I mean, it's all a matter of opinion, right? I know that there's a lot more that I would look at. You know, there's a lot of folk artists that are in there, a lot of like early rock and roll and pop and R&B stuff. You know, whatever. From our buddy Marhill77, what's up? Saga is my favorite prog band ever, and they are calling it quits after this tour. I think one of the best bands ever. Tons more than just On the Loose. I absolutely agree. Ian Crichton is without a doubt one of the most underrated guitarists all time. He's awesome. Would love a retro or a top 10 on them. Opinions, thanks. Yeah, I've been asked numerous times to do either a top 10 Songs of Saga or a Deep Cuts or just a history of Saga. And man, they've got so many albums. I own all of them. They're great, and I absolutely agree that On the Loose is just the tip of the iceberg. Not even their best song, their most well-known song, their own really hit, but they had a lot of great tunes on those like first 5 or 6 albums, but really all their albums are pretty damn strong. Great band. Probably as close to a poppy prog band as you're ever going to get, but they also like were pretty heavy at times, like really like Ian's guitar riffs were really metallic, so very, very cool band. Next question from Fraser Dawson. What genre of music do you listen to the most? And then in that genre of music, take 2 with you on island. What band would it be? You can take the whole discography. A hard question to answer. I think what you're asking is what's my favorite music genre? If I had to take one band's discography to a desert island, who would it be? All right. Well, first of all, my favorite genre is like it's kind of weird, blurs some lines here, but like 70s hard rock, 70s heavy rock, 70s proto metal. I love like the heavy bands of the 70s. That's my real love. I also love like pure metal, and I love obviously jazz fusion like from the 70s. I love progressive rock, obviously, but I think like that early metal 70s hard rock type of thing, it's probably my favorite. So of course if I had to pick a band that I would be stuck on a desert island with their entire discography and nothing else, it'd be kind of hard because my two favorite bands of all time are Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. Purple have more albums, so that'd probably be the better choice, right? But again, would I be happy if I didn't have any Sabbath albums? It's a hard question. I'd probably take the Purple albums because there's so many of them, and there's like different flavors of Purple, obviously. But I'd be kind of lost without my Sabbath albums too. So, good question. From John Bernard, hey Pete, love the direction you've been taking with your channel with the top 10. Also like the deep cuts. I have a suggestion for a possible new idea. How about doing a Diamond in the Rough album by various bands? An album that has a lot of good tunes that you would recommend but did not do commercially well for one reason or another, like a cult favorite. Great idea. Also, how about our best album packaging? I'm actually going to do a favorite album covers relatively soon. I got that on my list. That's probably coming before the holidays. Would probably be best done with vinyl packaging instead of CD. Yeah, unfortunately, though, I don't really own any albums anymore. I only have CDs. So, but I'm going to do a best album covers, or my favorite album covers anyway. That's probably going to be a long list, but look forward to that. From the Moogle Master, what do you think of these following bands or artists? Henry Cow. That's a pretty out there stuff. I actually like a couple of the Henry Cow albums. I have a bunch of them. Not a band I listen to often, but I do like some of their material. That early RIO stuff, Rocket Opposition. Pretty different, pretty out there. John Zorn. I have not heard a lot of John Zorn, unfortunately. Faith No More. I love the first three. Yeah, maybe even four. The first four Faith No More albums I like quite a bit. Obviously, why wouldn't you? And if you're a fan of like early mid '90s, rock, it's like, or metal, that kind of Faith No More blurs a bunch of lines. But man, I like those early albums quite a bit. Primus, and the Moogle Master says he's a huge fan. Other than like an album or two, I really have not heard a lot of Primus, surprisingly. Tom Waits. Sometimes I can't get past his vocal style, but I know the guy is a great songwriter. I know a lot of people love him. Ozric Tentacles, love him. Love Ozric Tentacles. A lot of people say that Ozric Tentacles has been making like the same album over and over again for the last 25 years. I kind of don't agree. I know they have similar elements to their music, but it's just like Hawkwind, right? You put on an Ozric Tentacles album and you just like get into it, and it just like seeps into your pores, and just the music just oozes coolness, and with all the awesome synths and screaming guitar work and the addicting grooves. I love Ozric. I've seen them live too, and they're a experience, let me tell you. Love Ozric Tentacles. Next question from Earl Joy. Pete, love your shows. Thank you, sir. What is your opinion of Gypsy, the American band, and XTC? I have those first two Gypsy albums, and I think they're quite cool. Very, very cool, underrated and unknown American prog band. I know they have like another album or two. I think they had 4, right? Something like that. I only have the first 2. I like them. I dig them. Good stuff. Good kind of, U.S. prog, kind of symphonic, kind of folky. Good stuff. I dig it. As far as XTC, I just started getting into XTC. So I know a lot of you have been asking me a lot of questions about XTC. Can you do a history of? Can you do a top 10 songs? I can't yet because I only just bought like almost their entire discography in the last couple months, and I'm still kind of digesting it. So a little early for me to do that. But thanks for your question, Earl. From Brian Harris. Hey, Pete, enjoy your show. Just wondering what type of headphones you use when listening to portable music. Are they earbuds, clip-ons, or the Beats-like type? What type of sound are you looking for? Deep bass, highs, etc. Hold on a second. Brian says, I favor Koss headphones. They have a wide variety and they are a quality product, but always looking for other suggestions. I don't have like really high quality. I use the earbuds, by the way, and I'm getting tired of them. I want to get the ones that kind of hang over and drop in. I need to really upgrade because I have like a cheap pair of earbud headphones that I use at the gym with my iPods. And they kind of suck, they're like, they dangle out as, whatever. And I don't, honestly, at the house, I don't really sit and listen to the music on headphones. Almost never. I just don't. So, but I need to. I want to get a good pair of like headphones, because I want to start doing that a little bit more. And I need to get something a little better for the gym. And I'm looking at like some of these what do you call it? Bluetooth headphones. Now I have the iPod Classics, the 160 gig. So of course those do not have built-in, Bluetooth, but I have an adapter that you can plug into that to make them. You can use it Bluetooth, obviously. So I think what I'm going to do is I want to get a pair of those cool like hangover ear thingies that have the Bluetooth and be able to then put the damn iPod in my pocket and not have to wear it around my arm and the whole deal. But anyway, good question from Henry Urbach. Thanks for this Q&A show. You're very welcome. I'm always impressed by your knowledge of rock music. Well, thank you again. Regarding UK neo-prog, I'm surprised you failed to mention Arena, Mick Pointer's band after he left Marillion, and Pendragon's Clive Nolan's band. I wonder what your opinion of their bands are. I don't think, to my knowledge, that I've heard Clive Nolan's solo band, although I've heard a couple of the solo albums, so I'm wondering if you're talking about the same thing. But I love Clive Nolan, and I love Arena. Yeah, and you know what? When I didn't mention Arena on the last show because I mentioned and we talked about a couple of like the early 80s, like neo-prog bands from the UK, and Arena didn't really hit till kind of early 90s. So for me, Arena was one of those bands that kind of popped out in the 90s alongside the Flower Kings and Spock's Beard and Angleguard and Ekelin, and I love those Arena albums. What are they doing lately? It seems like I haven't heard from Arena in ages. So good question from Ramon Ace. He's got a bunch of questions here. What do you feel about these albums? Okay. Genesis, Duke. I don't know if you watched my Genesis Top 10 Songs show. You found out that none of the songs from Duke made my top 10, but most of them made my honorable mentions. I happen to like Duke quite a bit. That for me is probably the last great Genesis album. I do like Duke quite a bit. In fact, Duke was the second? I think that was the second Genesis album I ever bought, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think so. I love Duke. Great album. Shadow Gallery, Carved in Stone. A masterpiece in my opinion. I'm going to agree with it. It is a masterpiece. I love Shadow Gallery. In fact, there's another question coming up later on about Shadow Gallery. I love all the Shadow Gallery albums. Budgie, Night Flight from 1981. I like the Night Flight album. I don't like it as much as some of the early 70s albums, but I think Night Flight's pretty good, and it's kind of fits into that new wave of British heavy metal sound quite a bit. Q5, Steal the Light. That's great, isn't it? That's a kick-ass album. Verity, Interrupted Journey from 83. I've never heard that. Toto's Hydra from 79. I dig Hydra. Hydra is a vastly underrated album. Most people, when they talk about Toto, they talk about the debut, and they talk about Toto 4. How about those two albums in between them, guys? Killer. Wings, Paul McCartney Wings, Back to the Egg, 1970 sign. Totally underrated album. I, growing up, was an enormous Paul McCartney and Wings fan. I still am. I love the Back to the Egg album. And can I tell you how destroyed I was when, that album came out. They went to go do the tour. McCartney gets busted for pot in Japan. Tour's basically canceled and Wings are no more. Because I thought that was a great album. Really underrated album and a good rock album for McCartney and the band. I dig it. Man, I think back on, I wish Wings would have kind of continued on more and more. But I read a recent biography and I think Paul had gone as far as it could with the band, which is sad. And then Vandenberg's self-titled debut in 82. Love it. Great album. I think those first two Vandenberg albums are great. Really good stuff. That was I remember when those came out, man. We were all really into it. Good questions there. From Zachary Newman. Hey, Peter, you familiar with the bands Scale the Summit and Chon, self-proclaimed adventure metal bands? Is that what they're calling that stuff? I am very familiar with Scale the Summit. I met the guys in Scale the Summit back when they toured with Dream Theater and Zappa Plays Zappa and Big Elf. Very cool guys, very young guys at the time. They're going back a few years. Very cool band. I love their stuff. I love that kind of instrumental metal, progressive metal, whatever. The other band, Chon, I've never heard before. From Rolando Castillo. Hey, Pete, really love your show and your insight. Thank you. Was wondering what you thought of Tool and Nine Inch Nails, two of my all-time favorites. Thanks and keep up the good work. I will. I like Tool. We've always liked Tool. Another band that just kind of like comes in, kicks your ass, and disappears for years on end. I think everybody's getting impatient waiting for that next Tool album. It seems like it's been forever. 9 Inch Nails, not for me. I never liked them. I've tried. I'm not a huge industrial kind of guy. I know 9 Inch Nails aren't totally industrial, but I don't know. I've tried. I've never liked them. I know people love them. I know plenty of people who are into 9 Inch Nails. They never did anything for me. But Tool is great. Tool is like another band that kind of like transcends a bunch of different genres, and they're just like such a cool band. And I dig their music. From Luis Roberto. 5 questions. Did you get a chance to see Sabotage with Chris Oliva? Yes, I did, on the Gutter Ballet Tour. Opened up for Megadeth, as a matter of fact. Mid-Hudson Civic Center, Poughkeepsie, New York, with my good buddy from high school, Chris Caffrey, debuting with the band on second guitar and keyboards. Hughes Thrall from 1982. Glenn Hughes said that the tour was small but had shows in some cities in the U.S. Did you have the opportunity to go to Hughes Thrall? No, in fact, I never even knew they toured that. But no, I did not see any Hughes Thrall shows. What is your favorite UFO album with Vinnie Moore? I sat and looked at them all, and they're all really good. I think the Seven Deadly album is probably my favorite by a hair, I think. But my opinion could change tomorrow. But I like that album a lot. The Allman Brothers Band or Lynyrd Skynyrd? That's a tough one. I love both a lot, but I think I'm going to give the win to the Allman Brothers Band just by a hair. Just because I love the kind of jazzy, proggy nature of some of that early Allman Brothers stuff. I love those like extended, like guitar solos and all that weaving stuff they did. But I love Skynyrd to death. So that's hard. They're almost neck and neck for me. But today I'm going to say Allman's. I might say Skynyrd tomorrow. A top 5 or a top 10 of Robert De Niro's movies. Man, you like me naming out my De Niro stuff, huh? Yeah, all right. So here we go. I think I'm going to do 10. Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, Mean Streets, Godfather 2. Can you see a Scorsese connection here? Goodfellas. Let's just continue the Scorsese connection. Well, I got a Coppola in there, sorry. Casino, Cape Fear, The Deer Hunter, Heat, and A Bronx Tale. With a very honorable mention, because I got to squeeze in here somewhere, for his portrayal of Al Capone in The Untouchables, right? So there you have it. Great movies. And number 1, without a doubt, is Raging Bull. I am an enormous Raging Bull fan, and I love Taxi Driver, and I love Mean Streets. Those are probably my top 3 out of those movies, but I love them all. What a great actor he was and is, but man, his early stuff, killer. All right, from Henry Urbach. Very cool you discovered XTC. And we just deal with the question from Henry. There are 2 other bands from that time in similar genre that I like, The Stranglers and Ultravox. Have you heard them, and what do you think? I have never heard a lick of the Stranglers. Ultravox, I've heard a couple tunes here and there. Can't say it affected me much. Maybe I need to go back and check them out, but I don't really have much to say about either one. Sorry. Love the recent, from Tarkus522, love the recent ELP Top 10 video. What are your thoughts on Emerson, Lake and Powell? Emerson, Lake and Powell and 3. He saw E.L. Powell in concert, and it was a cool show. Cozy definitely put a different flavor on the classic ELP songs. The 3 album I go back and forth on. Sometimes I feel it's a bit too pop-oriented. How about the Keith Emerson Band with Mark Bonilla? First, Emerson, Lake and Powell. I like that album a lot. I had an opportunity to see him on that tour. I didn't go. I was in college at the time and just didn't have the money for it. I love Cozy Powell to death. One of my favorite drummers of all time. I like that album. It's too bad they didn't do more, but you knew Mr. Palmer was coming back, right? As soon as he got done with Asia for a little bit. The 3 album is good. I mean, it's good, like kind of AOR, melodic rock type stuff. I dig it. I think it's pretty good. The Keith Emerson Band with Mark Bonilla, I've heard some of that stuff. I don't own anything. I like that pairing. I thought that was a good combination. And then when you added Glenn Hughes to the mix for a brief period of time, I thought that could have been a great superstar band, but it just didn't really go anywhere. So, from S. Bacon, what do you think of the 90s and aughts stoner bands like Caius, Queens of the Stone Age, and Masters of Reality? How about more recently, Eagles of Death Metal? On a recent rant, you talked about the death of the rock star, but to me, these are more like classic rock bands, often with a sense of fun. Yeah, I mean, these are all good bands. I like a lot of that kind of stoner stuff. I don't actually own any albums by any of them, believe it or not, although I might have a Caius album somewhere. But I don't own any Queens of the Stone Age or Masters of Reality. I remember that first Masters of Reality album was pretty damn good. I don't own any Eagles of Death Metal either, and heard very little of them. This is so many bands that kind of fall into that kind of like stoner category. So many of them. Those are some of the more popular ones, though. But everything I've heard, I've liked. From Barry Strong. Love these Q&A sessions. My question is, given that rock and roll has been with us for over 60 years, do you think that it is possible for new and innovative music to be recorded these days? Looking back, it seems that from the early 60s and the middle of the 70s was the most creative time for music we love, and since then the music is essentially a derivative from those times. Your thoughts? Yeah, I mean, and I've said this before, with all that's been recorded in the history of popular music, it's almost next to impossible for something to come out that's so completely new and different and innovative. I mean, it's all been like done and redone and redone and recycled, right? So where I basically, you know, if something comes out and it's just completely fresh and knocks me on the ass, great, I'm all for it. I don't expect it anymore. What I expect and what I look for are just bands coming out with memorable music. To me, it doesn't need to be overly original anymore, but as long as the music is good, as long as it moves me, as long as it's memorable, if the instrumental parts of it are good and memorable and well thought out and created, I'm okay with it then. I just think we live in a time where everything, whether it's, you know, music or movies or whatever, everything is just being rehashed and redone. TV shows, everything in the media is just rehashed from the past. And, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, the 60s, especially the 70s and even the 80s, was a great time for music, right? And because not many bands can come up with anything original anymore, what most acts are doing now is kind of going back to those glory years and taking that feel, taking that style and kind of doing what they do in a more updated version of those old styles. That's the world we live in, I guess. So, from Lonnie V. Hold on, Lonnie. I'm going to take another swig. You seem to like the Flower Kings, Marillion, etc. How about Transatlantic, the four-man supergroup? They are one of the few bands whose epic tunes that are 30 minutes long never seem like 30 minutes long songs due to their suite-like song structures. What say you about them? I love Transatlantic. And I will tell you something. When that first Transatlantic album came out, I actually saw them live. They played at Nearfest. They headlined Nearfest that year. And I remember totally loving the show, but or like the following like year or two after they released that album, I didn't revisit it much because at the time I was kind of like, yeah, that's a great album, but it's very long and overblown. And I was like, oh, and I was at a point where, man, how many more like epics, like, you know, because we had the Flower Kings doing all this epic stuff and Spock's Beard and, you know, Dream Theater. And it's like, oh my God, you know, I was getting like epicked out, right? But I will tell you, those successive Transatlantic albums, and I'm not knocking the debut because I do love it. I grew to go back and love it all over again. But all those Transatlantic albums are damn memorable and great and filled with fantastic vocals and instrumental passages, and they all work and they're not boring. And, you know, you got some guys in that band who are just like, you know, Morse and Portnoy and Trawavis and Stolt. I mean, these guys are heavyweights in the industry. And I think they just really mesh very, very well together. And you've heard me say this before. I'm going to say it again. Neil Morse is one of the musical geniuses of our time. This guy can write a hook. I love his vocal style. There's just something so like heartwarming about hearing Neil Morse sing. He's a great keyboard player. You know, Portnoy is very, very, very important too to that band. And Roy Stolt is another one. You know, I love Transatlantic. So I've really enjoyed each of their albums even more and more. So that's a great question. And probably a band that deserves its own show one of these days, right? From Sydney Pasquarelli. How many CDs do you own? I think I've been asked that before, but I'll say it again. I don't know exactly, but it's in excess of 8,000 easily. From David M. What are your thoughts on progressive electronic music such as Tangerine Dream, Jean-Michel Jarre, Patrick O'Hearn, and older Vangelis. It may not be your thing due to the lack of real instruments, but several of them have guitar players like Radio Massacre International and Code Indigo, just to name Code Indigo, just to name a few. I own a pretty massive Tangerine Dream CD collection over there. I dig Tangerine Dream a lot. Their early stuff just like mesmerizes me. It's so cool, even though it's only, sequencers and synths and occasional mellotrons and, every now and then you hear a guitar solo, whatever. So I dig Tangerine Dream. Tangerine Dream. I've heard a little bit of Jean-Michel Jarre. I don't own anything. I like what I've heard. Patrick O'Hearn, I don't have anything on. I don't own any older Vangelis, but I have heard some of that stuff and I do like it. So I like some of that stuff. I just, you know what it is? It's not something I listen to every day, so I don't feel the need to go out and buy a lot of different artists in that kind of field, musical field. I'm pretty happy with having the big collection of Tangerine Dream that I do have, but good stuff. It's definitely like mood music, and I have to be in the frame of mind to listen to that stuff, and when I do, I really get into it. From the Constant Reader, thanks for answering my question in the last video. He's the guy who asked about Borknagar. I have a question that stems from my Borknagar question from the last one. Borknagar was a band I discovered in my late teens, early 20s. By my late 20s, early 30s, I found myself not really into them and some other bands I listened to years before. I just recently pulled the 2 CDs I mentioned in my question in the last video from a box of CDs that I intend to eventually get rid of. I popped them in and gave a listen and found that I was enjoying them again. In fact, I find now in my mid-40s that I have a deeper appreciation for them, especially the musicianship. After all this, my question is, were there or are there any bands or musicians you had a similar experience with where maybe you stopped listening to but discovered them at a later date and had a deeper or different appreciation for their music? That's a good question. I would say probably the Beatles are one. I grew up in a house where my father was a big Beatles fan, and I was kind of like, Beatles are okay, but as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I loved Paul McCartney and Wings, and I much preferred them, and I still do to this day. I know that's probably blasphemy to a lot of you. I prefer them to the Beatles. And then for many, many years, I just kind of stopped listening to the Beatles altogether. But in recent years, I've gone back into the Beatles catalog and really just kind of discovered what a freaking great band they were, right? So that's one. Kind of different to your question, but I would say the Rolling Stones. I was never a Stones fan. In fact, when I was a kid, I hated the Rolling Stones. And then I kind of was like a little ambivalent towards them. I was just kind of like ignored them, whatever. But then about like maybe 20 years ago, I really got into the Stones. And I was like, what was I thinking all that time, when I was a kid? Stupid kids, right? Another band, too, that I liked when I was younger and then just kind of just fell out of touch with them for many years. And now I can't get enough of them, is Steely Dan. Love Steely Dan. God. It's like, it's a band, because I remember in the early 90s, kind of when grunge came in and killed metal and hard rock, and then metal just went into the underground. I got kind of turned off by the whole heavy music scene in the 90s, and I just reached out to prog and specifically jazz and jazz fusion. And like I said, I kind of liked Steely Dan when I was younger, but I don't know why I didn't fully embrace Steely Dan in my big jazz years of the 90s, because I got heavily into jazz in the 90s, and now I'm just kind of like, oof, man, Steely Dan just did a little bit of everything and so well. It's like, next question from Crazy Man Michael 100. Greetings from the UK. What's going on over the pond? Pleased to hear your opinions on Rory Gallagher and Taste, also Savoy Brown. Back in 1971, I first heard Maggot Brain by Funkadelic. It blew me away after listening to the usual rock tracks from Purple, Sabbath, etc. This was so different. Awesome guitar playing from Eddie Hazel. Have you heard it? Absolutely. Super Stupid, another good track. Your opinion, please. Keep up the good work. Yeah, that early Funkadelic stuff is great. George Clinton had the Parliament going on and Funkadelic at the same time. And it's like putting out albums. There's so many albums. I got a bunch of Funkadelic albums. That's good stuff. It's good heavy grooves, screaming guitar work. Eddie Hazel is a big fan of Jimi Hendrix, obviously. And I think, Ernie Isley, Eddie Hazel, very similar type guitar players and just awesome players. Yeah, I dig that early Funkadelic stuff. Good question. From Sydney Pasquarelli. Sydney, didn't we just get a question from you? It's all right, we'll do another one. Who's your favorite prog rock band? Well, it's a tough one. It's very close between two of them. On most days, I will tell you Genesis, especially the early Genesis. On other days, I'll tell you Gentle Giant. And on other days, I might tell you yes. But it's usually, for me, It's usually back and forth between Genesis and Gentle Giant. Okay, yes, usually number 3. King Crimson's high up there too. I always consider Jethro Tull a prog band, so they're up there pretty high for me too. I love ELP. We can go on forever about all my favorite prog bands, but yeah, Genesis usually, Gentle Giant sometimes as well. So from Scala, oh my God, Scala Grimmer Kavelj. Sorry, dude, I can't pronounce your name. Love your videos. Thank you for answering so many questions on your show. I'm sure it is highly appreciated by your audience. I hope so. Now for my questions. There are many great prog bands from Japan, like Gerard. Good band. Man, I haven't listened to Gerard in ages. Ars Nova. Wow, this next one I can't pronounce. Congela, whatever. KBB and Asturias. Do you know these bands? And if so, do you like them? I like Gerard. That's a... I got to pull that. I think I have one Gerard CD. I got to pull that out. It's great. Ars Nova, great band. KBB is awesome. I like KBB a lot. The other one with the really long name that I can't pronounce, I've never heard of before, and I've never heard Asturias before. Another question I have been asking myself for some time. Who released the first prog song or album? Many think it was King Crimson. Do you agree with that? Yeah. For me, I think the first full-on progressive rock album, as we now know it, now know the genre or the style of music, was In the Court of the Crimson King. I think prog was hinted at before that. Obviously, the Beatles dabbled in it a little bit. I think the Moody Blues certainly were doing progressive type stuff, but I think that first album that's like really prog like we know it is In the Court of the Crimson King. Just my opinion. There's many will probably debate that, and that's fine. That's just my opinion. That's the first full-blown progressive rock album. So I'll go on record as saying it. From Russell Gentile, Pete, your encyclopedic knowledge of many genres of music is beautiful. Thank you. Question number 1, your opinion on King Diamond, and most importantly, the concept album Abigail. I love Abigail. I was a fan of King Diamond when he was in Merciful Fate. I love those first 2 Merciful Fate albums, man. They scared the shit out of me as much as they thrilled me. Great stuff. I remember when those albums first came out, I was like, holy fuck, what is this? This is frightening. The lyrics are like satanic. I'm like, should I be listening to this? The music is demonic and heavy and great guitar work and those vocals. Phew. And then he left the band and went solo. I thought that Fatal Portrait, the first album, was great. I saw him on the Abigail tour. That was a load of fun. That's a great album. And what's funny is, we often talk about like concept albums in the history of rock and metal and prog and all that kind of stuff. King Diamond doesn't get enough credit. I mean, basically every album is a concept album. The Abigail album is great. The Them album is great. The Eye is great. And Conspiracy. And he released those like one after another after another. Almost like every year he put out like these amazing concept albums which are really kick-ass and very accessible sounding. Great guitar work, great harmonies, and his crazy-ass vocals, right? I dig King Diamond. Question number 2 from Russell. Any opinions on industrial and industrial metal like Ministry, Front 242, etc.? Yeah, I'm not an industrial guy. I've tried. It just doesn't do anything for me. Sorry. A Ministry. I know a lot of people love Ministry. They don't do a damn thing for me. I saw them live and I was like bored out of my mind. So I don't know. It's just me, I guess, right? Can't like everything. From Leaf Siklasi. Hey there, Pete. Numerous bands have great music with mediocre lyrics. Some bands can do both well. Which of your favorite bands do you most admire for writing good lyrics? I would have to say out of like some of my top favorite bands, the one that stands out where just lyrically they're on like a different level is Rush. I mean, Neil really went and did a lot of work putting together those songs, from a lyrical perspective. And they all tell stories. And, as much as I love like Deep Purple, Ian's lyrics were not, I mean, they're silly. They're like about life experiences and women and, getting wasted and all that kind of stuff. And, and that's fine. The music's excellent, but I think like Rush were like the total package. I mean, you bought a Rush album back in the day. Not only did you want to hear the songs and dive into the music, you wanted to sit and really go along and read those lyrics. Kansas is another band, okay? Rush and Kansas. Kansas, too. Kerry Livgren's lyrics were awesome. Both those bands, I think, really put a lot of effort into the lyrical content and the storytelling behind it. Good question. From James Ferrante, who would you consider the most acquired taste singer in popular music? For me, I've had a hard time liking the voices of Bob Dylan and James Taylor. However, I think I'm not alone saying that Yoko Ono is far beyond the average listener's taste. Well, hell yeah, she's on a planet all on her own. Christ, that woman should never open her mouth. I also just can't get into Bob Dylan. You know, I just can't not warm up to that guy's vocals. I just can't do it. But you know, you never say never, right? Because I remember there was a time where I had an issue with Neil Young, and I love Neil Young now. So go figure. The vocals in the Swans, the Residents, I just can't get into that stuff. Sorry, vocally, just Captain Beefheart's another one. He's just got a style of voice that just like grates on me. I can appreciate some of his music for the just out there-isms that it is, and you know, even some of the more bluesy stuff that he does. But again, what I've heard from Captain Beefheart, again, I don't hate it. It's just I have a hard time getting into it. I'm more on the metal side. Like I know a lot of you probably have, or some of you probably have issues with like death metal growls, which I generally don't. They're well done. But like a guy like Chris Barnes from 6 Feet Under, I just can't get into his style of growling. It's more like a grunting type of, it's just great. It's like nails on a chalkboard. I also never really liked Peter Steele from Typo Negative. I know, may he rest in peace and all that kind of stuff, and I know people love Typo Negative and love him. He just never did it for me. I just could not listen to him singing. I just couldn't do it. From Elias Kokinos, I would like to ask your opinion about Greek bands like Rotting Christ and Septic Flesh. Also, if you know Imperium and Vision Bleak. And what's your opinion about the last 3 Opeth albums? And have you heard Blaze from Japan? Okay, let's tackle these one at a time. Rotting Christ and Septic Flesh, both very, very good kind of experimental extreme metal bands. I hesitate to call either one black or death metal because they kind of do a little bit of everything, mixed in with some symphonic stuff and psychedelia and all sorts of assorted weirdness. But yeah, I dig both those bands. I probably like Septic Flesh a little bit more. Hard to say. They're both really good. I love the fact that they add a lot of proggy elements to their music. So if you're someone who likes your extreme metal with a little bit of prog thrown in, I highly recommend checking out both of those bands. I have never listened to Imperium or Vision Bleak. I've heard of Imperium. They've been around for a while. Vision Bleak I've never heard before. And I've never heard of Blaze from Japan. Let's go back to your Opeth part of your question. I love the last 3 Opeth albums. You know, there's a lot of people who probably were very disappointed when Opeth kind of got rid of the extreme metal side of their music and went strictly into like classic sounding prog and, you know, classic sounding hard rock. That's Michael Ackerfeld. That's what he really likes. Okay. I think he just outgrew the death metal thing. And I love all eras of Opeth. I really like the last 3. I love the last one. I thought Sorceress was a dynamite album. It was my album of the year when it came out. And it has become like one of my top 3 favorite Opeth albums, if not my favorite. I just love it. And I think there's a question coming up about my favorite Opeth albums. But the 2 that came before it are very different. That's the one thing. The last 3 Opeth albums, each one is extremely different from the other. The ones before it are heavily into like, you know, classic prog and avant-garde and little bits of folk and psychedelia. You know, and the new one's got a lot of good hard rock on it as well as prog. So really good albums. You know, very not the most accessible albums in the world, especially the 2 before Sorceress, Pale Communion, and I'm drawing a blank on the title of the other one. Anyway, whatever. You know which album it is. But I love them. I love them. I like the change in direction. I'm all for it. Do I miss their kind of progressive death metal days? Everybody does. But, you know, they wanted to move on, and I'm moving on with them. From Mike Oldfield, man, David Gilmour is very known outside the progressive rock genre. He's very known outside the progressive rock genre, despite Pink Floyd really not being much in the mainstream. I think Pink Floyd's as mainstream as you're going to get for a prog band. How come people like Steve Hackett, Alex Lifeson, and Martin Barr, and lots of others aren't as popular or well-known as David Gilmour? They all come from huge bands. I mean, you know, with Steve Hackett, unfortunately, Steve Hackett was in Genesis before they became huge. So for the common man, Steve Hackett's pretty much an unknown guitar player. And that's a damn shame, because what a talented player he is, and songwriter. I think that's the reason for Hackett. Now, Alex Lifeson, on the other hand, I think, you know, most people I think the thing with Rush is that Rush was a band. There was no one guy in the band that really, really stood out. You know, you go back to Genesis again. Most people know Genesis. Oh, you mean Phil Collins? Oh, you mean Peter Gabriel? The rest of the guys were kind of there, as important as they are and were. I think it's kind of a similar thing with Rush. I think Rush they were a band that no one of the three ever rose above the others. But I will tell you, and I was talking about this with some guys this morning, I think Alex Lifeson is one of the most original guitar players ever to walk this planet. And I think his contributions to rock music, and of course through the music of Rush, I think were stellar. I mean, man, the guitar solos, how original they were, his choice of chords and chord voicings and riffs, and man, great player. Yeah, so, and maybe, you know, Gilmour, I think, also had a couple of guitar solos that are looked at as absolutely legendary, you know, for Comfortably Numb and Time, just to name two of them. And I don't know, you know, maybe Alex or Hackett, you know, for me, Hackett's Firth the Fifth should be up there, and Alex, you know, Free Will and Limelight and La Villa Strangiato, great stuff, right? Martin Barr, I mean, come on. I was just this morning also talking about the Aqualung solo. That's one of the greatest solos of all time. And he's not a household name. But again, you look at Jethro Tull, everybody sees Jethro Tull, Ian Anderson. So whoever else is in the band, secondary, it's all about Ian. So I think that's why Martin never got renowned for being the virtuoso player that he actually is. So that's a great question. I just think that, you know, Gilmour was just a larger-than-life guy in a larger-than-life group, because I think when you really look at it, Pink Floyd were arguably bigger than any of those other bands. And I think, you know, they had, you know, it was Waters and Gilmour, the big guys out front there. So, I don't know. From David Ridgway, do you like the blend of Celtic and prog rock? The best example being San Francisco's Tempest. Yeah, I mean, I don't dislike Tempest. I've listened to plenty of Tempest over the years. It's a little light for me. I don't mind the you know, the little violin jigs and stuff like that they have in the music. Pretty cool stuff. It's not something I go out like. Another, maybe something similar is you know, Blackmore's Night, which again, I love Ritchie Blackmore. I never quite really got into and embraced Blackmore's Night, although I don't mind listening to them. Not really my cup of tea. Second part of David's question, have you ever heard any of Arjun Anthony Lucason's project, specifically Arion? Of course. I have every Arion release. I have loved them since the beginning. That's some bombastic all-star stuff, man. I think I've talked about them numerous times over the years here. Great band. Scott McGregor's got another one. I appreciate how you will give almost any kind of band or genre an honest listen. I try, man. I try. I'm pretty open-minded. Not too many people that can do what you do. Can you think of any band's albums that you had low expectations of and were blown away or at least pleasantly surprised? You have said as a guitarist, and you got two questions here. You have said as a guitarist you are more of a Gibson guy. Who are your favorite guitarists with the classic Gibson sound? All right, first of all, and I had to think about this. So a band or artist that I had low expectations on, and then I was pretty blown away by their music. You know, Alter Bridge. You know, Creed, I never minded Creed. You know, they were okay band, some good tunes. Mark Tremonti, I always thought was a pretty good player, but, you know, he never really stood out much in Creed. And so then, like, when Creed kind of splintered and he formed Alter Bridge, I was kind of like, yeah, whatever, you know. Didn't love Creed enough to bother going down that avenue. But then when I actually finally decided to listen to Alter Bridge, I was like, holy crap, they are a great, great band. And what a guitar player he is. I mean, this band, they had the hooks, they had the metallic metal crunch, the shred and solos, everything, one anthem after another. All the Alter Bridge albums are very, very strong. So that blew me away. Again, I went into going to check out Alter Bridge with no expectations, and I was like, holy crap. And I consider myself a big fan now. So that answers that part of the question. As far as my favorite Gibson players, classic Gibson players, well, you know, obviously Jimmy Page, right? Early Alex Lifeson, you know, he played like Les Pauls and 335s, and I think he played SGs a bit. I love all Alex Lifeson stuff, but he played a lot of Strats, I think, throughout the 80s. But, you know, the 70s, he played a lot of Gibsons. Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, obviously. Probably, for me, my favorite Gibson Les Paul slinger. because he played them pretty exclusively for a while. On the current, Gary Moore also. I know Gary also played a lot of Strats, and I think he played Ibanez for a while, but Gary played a lot of Gibsons, specifically Les Pauls, especially during his blues career. John Sykes, okay, from obviously Whitesnake and Blue Murder, played specifically Black Les Pauls, Customs. Currently, Warren Haynes is probably my favorite current Les Paul player. I love Warren to death, and his Les Paul tone is probably as classic Gibson as you're going to get. So those are some of my favorites. I know there's a lot more, but Peter Frampton too is another one. I mean, there's so many classic Gibson players. From CBH440, what do you think of bootlegs, and do you understand their appeal? Yeah, sure I do. I mean, there's people who are just like infatuated with live concerts, and they just want to hear like the same stuff, in a lot, and because a lot of bands excelled on the stage, right? And a lot of bands, their songs come across best live, and not all these bands release a lot of official live albums. So the bootleg industry is alive and well. Plus, if you like classic stuff, right? If you like classic bands, that back in the day, a lot of those were recorded. And there's bootlegs of all sorts of vintage concerts in the 60s, 70s, and 80s floating around all over the place in various quality. And I think it's just kind of cool if you like a band, and specifically a band that really was a great live band. And especially those bands, especially back in the day, where no two concerts were exactly the same. It's not like today. Bands don't improvise today. They play the same set list night after night, tour after tour after tour. But back in the old days, right, they'd mix that shit up all the time. The guitar player would do like a 15-minute solo one night, 20 the next. Drum solo would be 3 minutes one night, 6 the next. Sometimes they would put a medley in the middle of one song, or sometimes they would eliminate a song. They'd add 2 more, or whatever. So sky's the limit. People were taping that stuff, and it's available. You can find it. You can download it, buy a CD, whatever. I mean, sometimes the audio quality is awful, but I can totally see the appeal of that. I mean, I own some myself. I'm not going to lie. I don't have a lot, but I do own plenty of bootlegs from various bands. And it's kind of cool because, especially like for some bands that maybe didn't have that definitive live album, but there's bootlegs available. Well, that's as good as you're going to get, right? So I totally understand the appeal. From NP, hey, Pete, sorry to post twice in one thread, but this question popped in my head and I didn't want to forget it. Obviously, Woodstock was a monumental concert for the 60s everyone remembers. Can you think of an equivalent concert for the following decades, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on? And are they available to watch on YouTube or available to buy? Well, there was some notable ones. So you had the US Festival in 1983. And I believe much of the bands who were on the US Festival, in fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I forget sometimes, there's so much stuff out there, that there is an US Festival 83 like documentary, I think. I know a couple of the bands have put out like DVDs of their sets there. And that was, shitload of people went to that. Live Aid, maybe not as monumental as far as the amount of people that were in. I mean, that was in the UK, at Wembley Stadium and JFK Stadium here. So a good amount of people, but I think the enormity of Live Aid was truly spectacular. And that, everybody was watching that or trying to attend, that sort of thing. And I believe you can get most of the Live Aid stuff, or you can find it on YouTube. That was from 1985. Watkins Glen from 1973. So that was a couple years after Woodstock, and I believe that was in upstate New York. That was what the Grateful Dead, the Allman Brothers, and the band. And I believe there was like 650,000 people that attended that. To my knowledge, I don't think any of that's available. I don't think any of that was filmed, to my knowledge. But I would have to double check that, because that would be kind of cool to check out. Then, of course, you got the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970, okay, over in the UK. A lot of that's available on video. The Jethro Tull set, you can get the Doors set, Who, obviously. They did a documentary, Murray Lynyrd did a documentary on Isle of Wight, so that's very cool. Great list of bands at Isle of Wight. And then you got Altamont in 1969, right? And a bunch of that's available for purchase or to view or whatever. So a lot of really cool festivals, but not as many as like in the more recent years, which is sad. I think that big, other than like the metal festivals, you got like Walk-In and all that kind of stuff, and but living here in the U.S., man, that shit just doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately, which is sad. Love festivals. I wish, like in my youth, there was more of that going on. So, From David M. My wallet is much lighter now thanks to you. There you go. Glad to be of service. The following questions will show the diversity of my taste. What is your favorite Rippingtons release? I love the Kilimanjaro album. I love most of the Rippington stuff, but I love their second album, Kilimanjaro. Is like just great songs. Let's see. What are your top 5 sax solos across all genres? David says he loves Baker Street with Jerry Rafferty, Urgent by Foreigner, any of the Rippington solos with Jeff Cashuwal playing them. My 5, let's see. How about Born to Run by Springsteen with Clarence Clemens on sax. Baker Street's got to be up there, right? That's awesome. My Favorite Things by John Coltrane. Got to have Coltrane on there. Light Years by the Chick Corea Electric Band featuring Eric Marienthal. I dig the electric band a lot. I love Eric's playing, especially on that song. The Rippingtons' Backstabbers. I love that song, and that's got a great sax solo from Brandon Fields. So there you have it. Also, another part of his question, I love doom metal, so what are your thoughts about Trouble and Eric Wagner's The Skull? Trouble without Eric just does not have the same vibe. Yeah, I mean, I love the early Trouble stuff. It's awesome. And that reminds me, I got to get that new Skull album because that first one is kick-ass. I got to get the new one. So yeah, everything I've heard from the Skull I've loved. I love those first handful of Trouble albums. My God, that is classic Doom stuff. And yeah, I'm with you. I love Doom as well. Our buddy Steve says, are you familiar with Peruvian band Traffic Sound? Steve, I think you've asked me that before. They released 3 albums from 69 to 71, all excellent, but I think Virgin was probably their best. Yeah, I've listened to that first. I don't own it, but I've listened to that first Virgin album a couple times. That's pretty cool. It's kind of like early Psych. I don't know. I get a strong Beatles meets Traffic vibe when I listen to that. Pretty interesting stuff. From Tate Davis, great video. Could you do a retrospective on the band Sir Lord Baltimore? Watching your show made this 20-year-old college student a fan of them. I am so happy to hear that a 20-year-old kid is loving Sir Lord Baltimore. You, sir, deserve kudos for that. I always thought they were a very underrated band and the originators of stoner rock and metal. Hey, could be. It'd be a very short show since they only released like 3 albums, but I think it might be worth doing. Keep up the good work. Thanks. Yeah, that would be a very short show because they were only around, I think, in existence for like 2 or 3 years. But man, Sir Lord Baltimore, one of the unsung originators of heavy music. Those first 2 albums especially are heavy as all hell. Rivaling the best of like Purple, Sabbath, Zeppelin, Heap, all that kind of stuff. Great New York band. All right, we're getting down to the end here, guys. From Evo Zanetti, what's your opinion on Big Train? You know what? I'm almost ashamed to admit this. I don't own any Big Train stuff. I have heard bits and pieces of theirs over the years. I like everything I've heard. They kind of like remind me of like late 70s Genesis. I would love to know from you guys, what are the Big Train albums to get? Because I liked enough of what I've heard, and it's just one of those bands that you like, and I always like, I should get some of their stuff, and I never do. What should I get by Big Train? Because I would love to dive into their music a little bit more, because everything I've heard, I've really enjoyed. Great question. From NP, new question for you. What is your favorite Spirit album? Secondly, do you prefer the early era of Spirit or the later era, which is basically a Randy California solo project? Yeah, I mean the early stuff, obviously. I would say 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus or The Family That Plays Together. You know, I'll give you a different answer each day, but any day. But those are 2 of my favorites. Those are great. I love that early Spirit stuff. Great psychedelia, man. Great stuff. Also, your thoughts on Captain Copter and the Fabulous Twirly Birds. I have no idea who that is. Lastly, how about a history of Wishbone Ash? I know you have a lot of bands lined up, but I would love to see this. Yeah, and I'd love to do it. That would be a long one, right? Because Wishbone Ash, what a storied career they have had. I love Wishbone Ash. So they're on my list. I'd love to do it. From Miss Astor Dancer, have you heard Chris Squire's solo album Fish Out of Water? Of course. Probably, I'm not going to say probably, the best Yes member solo album ever released. I love Fish Out of Water. Another question from Miss Astor Dancer. Have you been a fan of Robert Plant's work outside of Led Zeppelin? Comments? Yeah, I mean, I like all of Plant's solo albums, especially the early ones. I think Pictures at 11 and The Principle of Moments are especially good. Shaken and Stirred is quite good too. I like them all. Some of the more recent stuff is pretty damn good. From Bill Goodwin, what are your thoughts on Shadow Gallery? I'm a big fan and love Mike Baker's Rest in Peace vocals. Yeah, what a sad loss. Also, your thoughts on While Heaven Wept. I love the mix of Doom and Prog. Yeah, I've only heard one While Heaven Wept album, and I dug it quite a bit. Good stuff. Yeah, very atmospheric kind of doom, but bits of prog. As far as Shadow Gallery, I said it before, I love Shadow Gallery. Carved in Stone, Tyranny, and Legacy, man, those are, all their albums are great, but those three are probably my favorites. Really, really good. For any of you who are just maybe getting into progressive metal, maybe via Dream Theater or whoever, and you're looking for more bands to jump into, definitely latch onto Shadow Gallery. I loved a lot of that early Magna Carta stuff, and Shadow Gallery were one of the leaders in that group of bands. From Bluebird 71, opinions on Welsh bands Cougar from the early 80s and Man from the late 60s, early 70s, and Budgie. All right, I've never listened to Cougar before. I don't know who they are. I like Man. I got a bunch of Man albums. They're a really interesting band, kind of just a good rock band, right? John Weathers from Gentle Giant was also in Man. Good stuff. I have a bunch of their albums. Budgie, I've already said many times before, I love Budgie to death. One of those underrated bands of all time. Really love Budgie. Again, if you're into like early, 70s heavy rock, proto metal, you need to be listening to Budgie if you haven't already. And their 80s stuff is pretty good too. From our buddy Jiff882, if you dig Dokken, you should give Rat a chance. Well, what makes you think I haven't? Warren DeMartini is as good as Van Halen and Lynch. They're more like Van Halen and Dokken, and less like Poison Molecule. Yeah, no, I don't really have an issue with Rat. I think their singer, Stephen Pearcy, is awful. Maybe he wasn't awful back then, but he's awful now. He needs to give it up. But I liked Rat. I would think out of all those kind of LA bands, Rat, for me, head and shoulders above, Poison and Motley Crue. Forget those. But yeah, I would say, Dokken was like my favorite band of that era, from the kind of U.S. hard rock, hair metal bands, whatever the hell you want to call them. I would say Dokken was my favorite. Rat probably was number 2 or 3. But yeah, Rat, very talented. Yeah, Warren's hell of a player. From Bongalong, in the realm of RIO, Avant Prog, what are your thoughts on these groups? Allman Vasarat. Bonus points if you can pronounce it. I hope I said it right. I've actually seen them live in concert once. They played at Nearfest a bunch of years ago. I thought they were great. Really out there stuff. Kind of like this weird kind of like, folky Zappa weirdness, just jazz, and great band. Hardscore I've never heard, and Motor Totemist Guild I've never heard. But Allman Vasarat, if I said it right, I like those guys. It's a great question, because I hadn't listened to them in years. From Luzardo Fox, have you heard L and Freeze Frame by Cream and Godly? I think they're great. What's your opinion? I haven't listened to a lot of the Cream and Godly, or Godly and Cream stuff, I should say, the former 10cc guys. Yeah, those 2 songs are okay. They're kind of electronic-y, kind of poppy, kind of new wavy type of thing. I prefer the stuff they did in 10cc, but I can see the appeal of those songs, and some of the stuff from especially from that era that they were doing. But I'm not overly familiar enough to give an honest opinion. What I've heard is okay, not really my cup of tea. But I do love the stuff they did with 10cc. But they started moving into more of that kind of 80s sound direction, which is fine. I know a lot of people dig that stuff, so that's great. From Melora Loves Darkness, thank you for the responses to my Tull 20th anniversary comment. 2 questions. What are your thoughts on Heart? And do you like Kate Bush in her avant-garde kind of prog style influenced by early Floyd? All right, first of all, I love Heart. Love Heart to death. I love all the eras of Heart. I wish Ann and Nancy would stop fighting and get back together so we could hear new music, because I love the more recent albums they've done together. The classic Heart from the 70s is great. I like the more 80s kind of poppy, AOR type stuff. I like all Heart. I think the Wilson sisters are wonderful, and I wish they would just get past whatever. I know what's going on between them, but it's horrible. But hopefully they can get past it. As far as Kate Bush, man, I'm sorry, I can't get into Kate. But this goes back to a question earlier on about vocal styles that you just can't get into. I can't get into her vocals. I'm sorry. That high-pitched nonsense of hers, just I got to take it off. So sorry, I don't like any Kate Bush at all. Sorry, I've tried. She doesn't do it for me. From Richard Filmer, great show. Would like your take on the first 2 solo Mark Farner albums, No Frills and the self-titled one. Oh, those are great. I like those albums a lot. I'm a big fan of Mark Farner. I think he's a very underrated guitar player, and he's a great vocalist. And I think those first 2 solo albums are very much in the Grand Funk Railroad style, right? So I dig them. Also, your opinion of the band Flint, an offshoot of Grand Funk featuring Don Brewer, Mel, and Craig Frost, featuring some great guitar work from Frank Zappa. Also, I think Todd Rundgren plays guitar on that as well. I don't actually own that. I need to get it. I've listened to it a couple times. That's also very good. Very indicative of the latter day Grand Funk Railroad stuff. So, yeah, I need to get that. I'm glad you asked that question because I need to just go and get it, seek it out. From Bert Carlson, could you name some of your favorite Swedish prog band artists from the 70s? Kaipa, for one. Samla Mamas Mana, obviously. Atlas. I think they all put it one album. I got it. I love it. Dice. Dice is like my unsung heroes of the 70s Swedish prog scene. I got a couple Dice albums. They're awesome. Really, really great stuff. Also, do you think you could do a show entirely on Swedish or Scandinavian prog from the 70s? I mean, I probably could. I don't know if there's a ton of bands. The problem is, it's really the bands I mentioned are the only ones I really know a lot about. So, could I do a show on Swedish and Scandinavian prog and music in general of all years? Because there's a lot of shit going on over there now. So, yeah, I could do it. Absolutely. Absolutely. From the Moogle Master, opinions on 80s college rock or 90s alternative rock? Do you think grunge helped rock out, or do you see it as the beginning of a decline? Well, as a metal guy from the 80s and 90s, I was not into college rock or alternative rock, all that kind of indie type stuff. Not into. I was a metalhead. That's all I cared about. Once like grunge and alternative started like kind of pushing everything else out, I went in a different direction. I started to listen to older music, so I started listening to like classic prog and the new wave of prog in the 90s, as well as classic jazz. And so for me, you know, I mean, let's be real. Grunge is rock, right? It's just a specific kind of rock, right? I think everything eventually evened out, and, you know, grunge kind of died out, and then you had like new metal and all that kind of, I mean, it's just waves of stuff. It just happens. But I was never big into like 80s, like college rock, indie rock, and the alternative stuff just didn't do anything for me. I rebelled against it. Sorry. From Charles Haynes, your opinion on Foghat. I know there are a lot of underrated guitarists, but I put Rod Price right up there with the greats. Hell yeah, man. Kick-ass slide player, too. One of the best. I love Foghat. Love all that early Foghat stuff. Just a great hard rock and boogie band. Big fan. From Jamie Laszlo, the 80s version of Tales of Mystery and Imagination by Alan Parsons is one of my favorite prog albums of all time. I have to admit that I'm kind of shocked that you have never heard it. No, because I always had the original from the 70s, and as far as I was concerned, that was great on its own. And honestly, I never had heard that they remixed it. So I just never did. Not that I really needed to, because I think the original is quite good. From Casavalanius Honestus, thoughts on Curved Air, and have you done a rundown on their history? Also, how do you rate Suzi Quatro's impact on women in rock music? Well, I have not done a history of Curved Air, probably because I'm not overly knowledgeable on the history of Curved Air. I have the Aircut album. Love that. It's quite good. The only other album I've ever heard by them is Phantasmagoria. Other than that, I'm not big into Curved Air. Not that I don't like them. I just haven't had a lot of exposure to them and haven't dug any deeper. But I do like those 2 albums. As far as Suzi Quatro, I mean, yeah, she was like, the first like rocker chick, you know, basically. You know, she played bass and she kicked ass at it, and she sang good, and she looked good, right? She had the look. She's a good-looking woman, and she could belt it out. You know, unfortunately, here in this country, in the United States, I mean, Suzi was like a name you always heard of, but her music never was like bestseller type of material. So, I mean, you know, I remember growing up as a kid, you read Cream magazine and Hit Parader and Circus, and you'd always see Suzi Quatro in those magazines, but it's not like Suzi Quatro was like playing on AM radio or something like that. But, you know, even now, like you go and listen to like Suzi's like a greatest hits collection, something like that. You know, a couple tunes you might remember, but for the most part, she was never a huge artist. However, did she influence like a lot of these like rock and roll women? Absolutely, she did. And I think for that, she's so important. And she kicked ass, and she played an instrument and played it really well. So yeah, absolutely, Suzi Quatro has had a huge impact and huge influence and did not get the credit that she deserved. Great question. Next one from Beastman. Greetings from Germany. I really like about you is what I really like about you is your generally positive and friendly attitude towards music. Well, it's my love, man. That being said, I'd really like to know, apart from Dylan, what kind of music do you actually not like? More specifically, which artists, bands, etc. do you not like? Well, I think I'd mentioned before some of the bands that I really don't like and I find very overrated as hell, and I have no use for them. You know, Motley Crue, Poison, Guns N' Roses, Green Day, almost any rap band you can name, Blink-182, Nirvana, Pearl Jam. There you go. I could probably list a hell of a lot more. Faster Pussycat. I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff I don't like. Rap and hip hop, I just can't get into. You know. I'm trying to think what else I just can't stomach. I mean, I'm open-minded just about anything else, but some of that stuff, blah. From MWO 486, I know you like the Dixie Dregs. Yes, I do. In my opinion, the first 3 albums are perfection and works of art. I am interested in what you think. Yeah, those first 3 albums, actually, I think every Dixie Dregs album is basically perfection and works of art. I think that band is so unique because they kind of combine, like, rock and country and bluegrass and jazz and fusion and prog into this like kind of mishmash of styles that just really worked and was just so unique. Every guy in the band is a absolute virtuoso. I just love that they just were not afraid to do anything, and those albums are awesome. I think all those Dixie Dregs albums are awesome, all of them. I mean, my favorite's probably the What If album, but man, you can't go wrong with any of them. Love them. Great band. Brian's back again. I enjoy music with a female singer. My top 3 are Joni Mitchell, Paula Cole, and Jonathan Brooke. I don't know who that is. What are some of your favorites? Well, I just talked about Ann Wilson from Heart, who I think is one of the best female singers of all time, especially, well, rock singer anyway. Pat Benatar, big fan. Annika von Gersbergen, okay, ex of The Gathering, now, you know, doing all sorts of stuff. Simone Simmons from Epica. She's amazing. She's great to look at, too. Floor Jansen from Nightwish, some of my current favorite female singers. Mark Williams, what's going on, Pete? Love your channel. What do you think of the 2 albums by The Storm? Also, John Norum solo albums. I had that first Storm album at one time. I don't own it anymore. I had it on CD. I don't know whatever happened to it. I guess I didn't like it enough. You know, good AOR, melodic rock. I think it's good. You know, a couple ex-Journey guys on there at the time. Good stuff. I've actually, before the show, I went and listened to a couple of tunes. I was like, yeah, I remember that stuff. Pretty cool. John Norum. I'm a big John Norum fan. As you know, I love Europe. Total Control, Face the Truth, and Another Destination are his first 3 solo albums. All 3 of them are great. The Face the Truth album is unbelievably good. That features Glenn Hughes on guest lead vocals, and that album kills. It's got screaming solos and crunchy riffs and just amazing vocals from Glenn Hughes. One of my favorite albums that he has sung on that sometimes I forget about how good it was, and it's just awesome. I love John Norum. From Dave D. Francesco, it would be great if you could do a show on the father of British blues. John Mayall is 85 and still touring and releasing new material. What a talent, a living musical legend. Hell yeah. I mean, geez, God bless him, right? From Eddie Van, love your videos. Like finding out new stuff out. My question, seems you're into rock, jazz, heavy metal. So curious if you know the Ukraine band Ginger. Jinjer. If so, what do you think of them? If not, look for the video Ginger Pisces live session, Napalm Records. I have not heard them. To my knowledge, no. By the way, glad to hear you love Golden Earring. Yes, indeed. From Clive Walker, thank you, Pete, for the great show. Great insight into a ton of music. Love the 10 favorite Yes in ELP list. My question is, could you name your top 5 live albums of all time? Mine are Made in Japan, Strangers in the Night, Bursting Out, Pictures in an Exhibition, and Sensational Alex Harvey Band Live. Also, your thoughts on Anglo-Guard. Thank you. Okay, so Made in Japan, live at the Fillmore from the Allman Brothers. Strangers in the Night, UFO. Oh, Made in Japan, Deep Purple, in case you didn't know. Kiss Alive, and Thin Lizzy, Live and Dangerous, with there's a bunch of them I could probably also name. I don't want to keep doing honorable mentions. I was just going to say Grand Funk Railroad's first live album. Love that. Jethro Tull, Bursting Out. It's another great one. So, yeah, there's too many live albums to mention, man. So many great ones. You know, Jimi Hendrix, Band of Gypsies, live at Woodstock, The Who, live at Leeds, Paul McCartney and Wings, live over America. I mean, it's so many great ones. So many great ones. In fact, I believe I did a history of live albums show. Go check it out in the library here. It's awesome. My thoughts on Anglo-Guard. Hell of a great band. I was lucky to see Anglo-Guard live at Nearfest, man. What a life-changing experience that was. I love all those Anglo-Guard albums. What a great band, right? just, man, the mellotrons and the Hammond and the guitars and the acoustic guitars and the great Rickenbacker bass, and they just like hit on all those great 70s feel-good elements. I love Angleguard. If any of you out there have not listened to Angleguard, you need to. Trust me. From Arnaud B, thank you for your brilliant videos. Love your channel. Thank you, sir. Could you tell me, everybody's asking this, could you precisely tell me what bugs you about Magma's music? You know, some of you guys just can't accept the fact that I don't like Magma. I've tried. I don't hate them. I just can't get into them. I don't know why. I like the jazzy aspects of some of Magma's music, and the Kobaya chanting. Yeah, that's definitely something that just rubs me the wrong way. It just annoys me. I would love to hear like all of Magma's albums with the vocals taken out, because I think musically, and that's what really attracted me to Magma initially, was how kind of cool and jazzy their music is, and then that singing comes in, and I'm just like, oh God, it just turns me off. And no, the drumming's awesome. I mean, he's a great drummer, you know. So I'm sorry, I've tried. I know so many of you are trying to convince me that I need to give Magma another try. I've tried. I had like the whole discography for years and years and years. I just couldn't get into it. I got rid of them all. I'm like, I just can't get into it. Sorry. What do you think of Shakti, and do you prefer Mahamisha Orchestra? Yeah, I prefer Mahamisha Orchestra, although Shakti's pretty cool. It's some cool, intricate music, you know. But Mahamisha, yeah, that's for me. That's for me. From Lawrence Terwilliger, I like Mastodon, Opeth, Dream Theater, and Thank You Scientists. Can you recommend prog metal bands or albums that are in the same vein as the aforementioned groups? I am still new to this genre of metal. I could use your input. Thanks. I would suggest you check out some of these acts. Amorphous from Finland. I think, and again, maybe I should ask my question. What era of Opeth have you getting into lately? Just the newer, more recent stuff, or the kind of progressive death metal stuff that they did prior? Because if you are into that, the older stuff, I'm going to name a bunch of bands here that you'll probably get into. So definitely Amorphous, I think you'll like. If you like the older Opeth stuff, really, really great. As far as like your Dream Theater comment, you know, check out bands like Vandenplas, Seventh Wonder, absolutely Seventh Wonder, Tomorrow's Eve, Redemption, Haken, Symphony X, okay? Also for the early Opeth stuff, check out Edge of Sanity, Fallujah, Fallujah, Between the Buried and Me. For Mastodon, I don't know a lot of bands that kind of sound like Mastodon, but check out Baroness. Okay, another band, if you don't mind the occasional death metal vocals, check out Obscura. Obscura are great. Orphan Land, you know, Thank You Scientists are kind of all over the place, but like Orphan Land is very progressive, very much metal, but they also have that cinematic thing going on. So check them out. Persephone also you might like, and Pain of Salvation. So there's a bunch of other bands you can investigate. From Hamyez, Hammyez, Hamyez. Hey Pete, never heard you talk about them, so I was wondering if you've heard like the band King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I have never heard of them, that's why I haven't talked about them. From John Harden. Hey Pete, not sure if you've heard. I've heard you talk about Triumvirate ever. I know you've heard them. Any love for them? Yeah, I talked about Triumvirate on I think my top prog bands of the 70s, the Underground, I think. Or I mentioned on one of those episodes. Yeah, they're, awesome band. Kind of ELP-like, you know. I love the Spartacus album and the Illusions on Dumple Dimple, and of course their debut Mediterranean Tales is good, but all their albums are really good. Very good, underrated band. From AZDH85224, have you had the chance to listen to Chris Duarte? Great guitar player and great to see play live. You know, I actually had a Chris Duarte CD back in like the early mid '90s. I remember liking it quite a bit, but then it's like he just kind of disappeared off the face of the earth. And I don't even know if I still own it, to be honest with you. But yeah, really good player. I thought so anyway. Another question from Bongalong. Progressive Christmas albums, any favorites? Obviously, the Jethro Tull album is awesome. I listen to that every holiday season. I like the Moody Blues one, too. That's about the only ones I have. From Moon Crazy, 1970. Hello, Pete. Always enjoy your videos. What do you think of Opeth? Favorite album? Least favorite album? Well, my favorite albums, I would say, are Sorceress, Watershed, Blackwater Park, and Ghost Reveries. Probably my favorites. My least favorite is probably the debut Orchid, but I do like it, obviously, but that's probably my least favorite of all of them. From Ryan B, what are your thoughts on the bands Twisted Sister and Wasp? I think I hinted on my last show that I'm not really much of a Twisted Sister fan. I like a song or two here and there. Same thing with Wasp. I mean, their first 2 albums are pretty good. I mean, you know, I don't dislike Wasp. I think most of their stuff is decent enough. I'm not big on them. From Alex Hamilton, do you have any thoughts on British band Stone the Crows? I have all their albums and think they are sadly ignored by the majority of the public. Good band. I mean, yeah, hell yeah. You know, Maggie Bell was a hell of a singer. If you like Janis Joplin, man, Christ, she got pipes of doom. And Jimmy Dore was on those first 2 albums, I think, playing bass and doing a little backup vocals. Man, great guitar work on those albums. Good blues rock band. From Fraser Dawson, we're on the last 2. Fraser Dawson, I like your show. I like a lot of hard rock and new wave of British heavy metal and thrash and black death metal. If you had a choice, what band would you like to see you've never seen before? And I came to your house to play for you. What band would you like to? This is a wacky question. In other words, what band would you like to bring to my house that I've never seen before, live or dead? Like, I'm pretty sure that's what you're asking. All right. My answer would probably be Led Zeppelin. Never seen Led Zeppelin. Gentle Giant also would love to have seen Gentle Giant, or maybe Gabriel era Genesis. So there's 3 for you right there. All right. Last but not least, from my buddy Scott Liosky. Hey, Pete, what's your take on the obscure James Gang albums Passing Through, Newborn, Straight Shooter, and Jesse Come Home? You know what? I like all those albums. I like all the James Gang albums. But that was a band that was in just ridiculous transition after Joe Walsh left. I think those first 2 after he left. You know, it's ironic. Most people always say and assume that Tommy Bolin stepped into Joe Walsh's shoes. He really didn't. Dominic Troiano, how does he say his name? Troiano, however he says his name. He actually was the first replacement for Joe Walsh, and did a damn fine job. I like all those James Gang albums. You know, obviously the first 3 are the best, but they're all good. You know, and they got a good mix of hard rock and some kind of country rock stuff and a little bluesy stuff here and there. Just good rock and roll. But you know, the lineup of the band just changed every single album. So I think, you know, the James Gang kind of fell off the map after a couple of years after Walsh left. And I think they had a little bit of a resurgence when Tommy was in the band, but then it was just like this revolving door of players. And but I think I have all the James Gang albums on CD, and I think they're all pretty damn strong. So that's my take on that. So guys, thanks again. Remember, visit us on the web at www.ctranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on the mighty YouTube. Submit your questions down in the comments and feedback section. I will go and try and tackle them on next week's show. And remember, if you haven't heard answers to your questions, probably means that they've already been asked before and I've tackled them on previous shows. Or it's just a really in-depth question that we need to take a whole show to do. And usually I'll call it out if I'm going to do something like that. So anyway, guys, take care. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.